Hey, everybody, welcome to Operation Freedom's very own Department of Advanced Research. And no, your eyes do not deceive you. I'm not alone today. For the first time in the history of the Department of Advanced Research, I have friends in my little nerdly corner of Dave's universe. And they come to us today in the form of Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe. I'm going to warn everybody now, I can't read the intros as slick as Dr. Dave, so if it looks like I'm reading these off a screen, there's a perfectly good reason for that. It's because I am. For those of you that don't know, Kirk and Bill, Bill Binney is a former highly placed intelligence official with the United States National Security Agency. He then turned whistleblower and resigned October 2001 after more than 30 years with the agency. He's a high-profile critic of his former employers during the George W. Bush administration. Bill was a Russian specialist, worked in the operations side of intelligence, starting as an analyst and ending as technical director prior to becoming geopolitical world technical director in the 1990s. He then co-founded a unit automating signals and intelligence with the NSA Chief Dr. John Taggart. His NSA career then culminated as the technical leader for intelligence in 2001. So that's Bill taken care of. On to Kirk. Kirk Wiebe is a retired National Security Agency whistleblower who worked with the agency for over 32 years. During his tenure, he received Director CIA Meritorious Unit Award, Meritorious Civilian Service Award, the agency's second highest distinction for work against foreign strategic weapons system. All right, guys. So that's the intros out of the way. And by the way, if you want to see a much more smoother and much more eloquent version of that, you guys have done a number of interviews with Dr. Dave. He does it way better than I do. But in any way, I do welcome both of you to the Department of Advanced Research. How are you guys today?
Pretty good, Nick. Good to be with you.
Yep. Doing well, Nick. Thank you. Good to see you.
All right, super cool. Well, we're gonna try to have a little bit of fun today, but we do have something serious to talk about, especially as November rapidly approaches, and that is the security and the sustainability of our current electorate system in this country. And I can't think of two better people to join me in discussing this than two guys with wealth of technological knowledge that extend far beyond my own. So what we'll do is, I guess, in the interest of bringing everybody up to speed, most notably me, if you were going to start to pick out some problems with our current system of electing leaders in this country, at the state level, at the federal level, I'm going to let you guys loose and just have at it. Where are we in terms of problems?
Well, let me tell you, it's across the entire process of voting, Nick. I wish I could point to one spot where there's a weak point, but they're so numerous, and they begin simply with the voter registration process and the fact that many, many states have voter rolls that are not accurate. If you watch what Judicial Watch has been doing with truethevote.org, they're trying to clean up the voter rolls. They find over 1 million people not eligible to vote in Los Angeles County in California, just to give you one example. Over 1 million. And they had to go to court to cause corrective procedures to take place. Well, if we're not going to have cooperation and we have to go to court every time something's wrong, we're not going to do much by the time the election arrives in November. Now, so it starts with voter registration is a huge problem, huge. And then if you go up the line of the voting process, beginning with the voting machines, they say they're never online. They are online. And we don't know all the circumstances of when they are, when they aren't. But if you're online at all, you're open to infection by hackers and bad players. Then we find out that the votes are tallied and put on storage devices like thumb drives, memory cards, that kind of thing, and transferred from the voting machines to the counting machines. Now, if you have a bad guy in the polling place, he can remove that hard drive and play with it, especially if no one's looking. And what we find out is due diligence is not healthy in most polling places. In other words, poll watchers, people don't really know what to look for, what procedures to follow, etc., to keep it secure. And there have been documented cases where these devices have been removed, doctored, put back into the process, and counted with a different total. So we know that. That's not hocus pocus. That's actual. And then when they get into the counting process, we're hearing anecdotal reports that hackers have no problem getting into the online reporting of the vote totals and changing them on the fly. Now, good hackers will tell you that's possible. You got to know what you're doing, but it's possible. And so the system is rife with errors and openness to hacking and malfeasance by bad players.
So it sounds to me like you have actually two problems in one. My expertise is going to be on the latter portion of that, of the, I guess if you want to call it the lunatic with a thumb drive portion of the equation, and all the fun and nasty things that you can do with a bootstrapper program or with some executable code, appended to a large file, right? But it sounds like we have two problems, effectively. One of them is more of a database purity, a database sorting, a database verification process, and then from there, you have a completely separate process linked to it, but not directly. But then you have the actual process of executing an election, right? So I'm pretty correct in saying that this is really a kind of a two-part problem.
Yep, it is. Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
And the database of voters, registered voters, is the first thing that we thought would be easy to clean up, simply by comparing existing databases already at Social Security or in the phone books, or with the Department of Motor Vehicles, things that states have available for them to compare and use, and also validate that the people are alive and where they live and their eligibility to vote. And we reckoned, Kirk and I put a proposal together to be able to make that happen across the entire country, given access to the voter registration rolls and the Social Security and the phone books and things of that nature. We could easily do that. And we still have time before the election, but it's getting awful close right now to be able to do that within that time frame.
Logistically speaking, how much of that comes down to willingness and how much of that comes down to multiple formats of database, multiple platforms that have been used? Some of them are antiquated. Some of them might be as old as Cobalt. Some of them might be B+ tree Java. There's all these different formats, and anybody that works with databases knows databases of different formats, even no matter your best intentions, do not work and play well with each other. So how much of this is a purely systemic problem, absent any additional politics that may be on top of it? How much of it is a tech issue?
Well, I didn't. We have a lot of experience in merging multiple data sets, so in multiple formats and all that. That's not really a problem. I mean, it's a matter of just downloading it to a separate state base for you to do manipulation of picking and putting data elements in each of the sets down into a common format. And once you do that,
breaking all that data down, dumping it into just RTF, rich text, and then loading it back into your own columns in your own rows to make something of it that's now a conglomeration of 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 or 1,000 different databases. That's right. That's not an issue.
No.
God, when I grow up, I want to be able to say that. You got 800 different formats of database? No problem. We got it.
Yeah. Just take one at a time,
Yeah. I mean,
that's all.
No. So the data is not a problem, but the accuracy of and legitimacy of the data is, because that's left up to each of the individual states. A lot of people don't realize that the federal government is not responsible for elections.
Right.
It's the various states. It's in the Constitution. It's in the power of the states. Well, you got 50 states. You got to have 50 different formats for storing data, but that's not, as Bill has mentioned, is not a real problem. What is a problem is getting the people to clean up the voter rolls. And I don't know, honestly, what software each of the 50 states uses to do registration cleanup. I don't know if they have access to a number of the more public databases or databases that could get permission to access, like the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, the Social Security Death Index, property owner database, all of these things, even telephone company records that probably show the accurate address of a phone owner, because everybody needs a phone and has a phone, and that would be a wonderful record to have access to. How much of that they actually have, I don't know, but I tend to think not much, because they're very delinquent in updating their databases, and that's real. So it's a behavioral issue at the state level and a technical issue, I think.
Yeah,
So
but
you guys
if we
go
could,
ahead, Bill.
if we could get into the databases, I think we could resolve that with a little bit of software. I mean, I don't think
Right.
that wouldn't be an impediment to us. I mean, we would be able to do that. So I don't see that as a game changer or in any way an impediment to actually succeeding at what we wanted to do, which is fix the.
If we had permission.
Yeah, we have to have the permissions. That's the whole point. If you have the permissions again and the availability, like if you can buy the phone book for the United States, no problem. If you can get the data from Social Security, no problem. The census data, for example, is also a good one. So all of that kind of information would be pull it together and then put it down into a common format. You could basically what we call not anonymized, but make sure that the data that you're comparing is correct and equivalent, and that way you could verify and validate who is a correctly registered voter, eligible to vote, and who isn't.
Right.
So this is, I mean, you guys have both, I'm sure, heard the expression, and those that work in or around tech, especially data, have heard the expression garbage in, garbage out, right?
Right.
So my question is, when you say a database, a voting record, just to make sure someone is eligible to legally vote in this country, these databases are antiquated or they're obsolete. How bad is it, really? If you were to start cracking files open and actually looking at these databases, how out of date is it? Like, are we talking 6 months, a year, 6 years, 10 years? I mean, all the above.
Yeah, probably. That's what I would say. But I mean, even so, I mean, you could still through software be able to compare and equate them and be able to correct all that data. So I mean, that's the kind of thing we've done in the past with over 14, 15, 16 databases. Pull them all together and do that kind of thing, and you get a good answer in the end. Like, for example, Customs and Border Protection. They have like 10 years worth of electronic data on imports and exports, but they aren't verifying and validating the data, which we would do, which would make sure that you knew the correct version of every entry, whether or not that person input that entry properly or not, and you could fix that stuff. So and do it all with software.
So that's step one, is to clean up these databases. Now, we say clean up like it's just, tidy up, but this is for those that do work with, that may be watching, that work with large sets of data. And I know your guys' definition of large sets of data and my definition of large sets of data differ dramatically. You guys are in a whole nother league when you start talking about databases with literally hundreds of millions of records in it, and it takes me a minute just to wrap my mind around that. Or billions of records. I mean, I just have sort of a visualization of what the files look like, and it makes my head hurt, Bill. It makes my head hurt just a little bit. But when you're talking about these records and you're talking about these massive databases, it sounds easy enough to do, and it's one of those things where I think a lot of us, including me, why hasn't it been done yet is my question. I think a lot of people's question.
Well, I think we're running into the lack of the will to do it. Right? Plus they think, gee, this is going to cost me a little bit of money. I don't want to spend that there. So, I think those are the main problems we're running into.
So I have a bit of a cynical question. This is for both of you guys, and that is, how many people in your travels and I know you have quite a lot of it, but how many people in your travels have you spoken to that legitimately may not understand the technology but want to fix the problem, right? Versus how many people legitimately understand the technology and don't want to fix the problem for an agenda that they may have? What would you say the split is?
You want me to take a guess? I would probably say something less than 5% want to do something, and the rest don't.
So there's 95% of the folks that you've spoken to, both you guys in your travels, where this system is broken. Admittedly, it's a broken system, and 5% of those that you've spoken to have shown any interest at all in actually fixing it.
What would you say, Kirk?
Yeah, I think it's very low as well, Nick. And when you stop and think of our form of government, our constitutional republic, the most powerful tool a person has is the vote. And yet it's treated as a tertiary matter of importance, or it doesn't even make the list. And this is what's shocking. And every state who doesn't have their ducks in order ought to have the people responsible fired. And if people want to know who is generally responsible, it is in most states the Secretary of State for any given state is the responsible individual. And they play loose and fancy with the process.
What gets me with this, though, is now perhaps I'm being a bit naive on this, and that's not something that I'm accused of often, but this should be a bipartisan issue in the sense of, this is really simple. You may not like the outcome of an election. You may not agree with the person that won. You may not agree with the person that... You may not like the result of it, but wouldn't it be nice to know that it was at least done in a fair and equitable manner? So this you should be seeing support, in my mind, from both sides of the aisle, and it's very easy, I think, to take this issue, and here comes the cynic, and that is to take this issue and say, oh, they cheat, we don't. And to me, you're not quite getting it. It's not an us-them thing, it's a systemic thing. Am I pretty spot on there?
Yeah. Okay. It is. Absolutely spot on.
So
that if you begin to look at solutions, we need to replace the existing process. It really is a weak, crippled system. And that includes the voting machines themselves and the counting process and all of that. Someone needs to sit down and try to give birth to a more secure, simple, we can't make it complicated, but it's got to be ironclad as possible process to cast one's vote.
Well, that's the other half of this equation now, is the process of voting, of going into a polling place and casting your vote. And once again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but we have some states with paper ballots, some states with electronic ballots, some states with a combination of both. And to me, having done desktop support for years, that's the situation from hell, because it's sort of like walking into a place and saying, okay, they got Mac, they got Linux, they got IBM, they have two different data. The more flavors of something you add in, the more inherently complicated it becomes. How bad is it on the state-by-state level, or how bad is it at the intrastate level that you guys have seen?
I'd have a hard time dealing with that. Go ahead, Kirk.
In other words, let's say we pick one state at random. How many different systems can exist within that one state just to tally votes? Oh. Some electronic, some paper.
3 to 4 different manufacturers.
Yeah.
And they all claim their individual software is proprietary. And while they now are beginning to say, well, we can let you look at the software, that was not the case as recent as 12 months ago. They would not let state officials examine software.
At
Can
all.
you imagine that?
So their claim was that the software that were on these machines was completely proprietary. Not that you guys were probably even trying to look at the source. You wanted just to see the system, the front end of it, and you were unable to even get your hands on that.
We would have to get a state official to override the objections, and it might even involve a court case, because the companies have rights, and the secretaries of state have largely recognized those rights and signed off on them. So they've got themselves in a weak posture.
So to even begin to investigate the problem pretty much requires an act of Congress, effectively, just to even be able to see. Now, I'm being a bit facetious there, but the flaming hoops which you guys would have to effectively jump through just to be able to sit down and say, do something as simple as an ethical pen test to determine if it's secure, right?
That's right.
To do an on-network, an on-network pen test. Yeah. Can't even get your hands on that to even determine how bad that problem is.
Yeah, it would not be straightforward. It would be murky, mucky, and probably long and drawn out, and there would be legal challenges. That's why I think the simplest, shorter answer is to replace those systems. They cannot control the marketplace. So if you give the states a better solution, they can just buy that solution instead of put up with all the court battles over the old legacy existing systems.
Well, Bill, this one's for you. When you talk about a networked environment, or you're talking about a multi-system environment, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have 4 separate proprietary systems running, that means you have to figure out 4 ways to secure 4 different systems. That makes those collectively, all 4 systems together, makes them collectively an easier target for outside interference, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure it does. But our plan was to put sniffers on the line at any time that we had an air gap from one segment to another. We put sniffers there to see who was doing what with the data, or what was happening. Even if the software was doing something to the data, we would be able to pick that up.
So you're talking internally, like an offset, for instance, because to me, if you go and if you crack one of those machines open and there's anything but round integers in there, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you're not democracying right, as I often say. If somebody's getting 1.1 votes versus somebody else is getting 0.9, you're not doing it right.
Right. That's right. So the other point is, we thought we needed Y connectors, or on the optical readers, if you had that, something that could take the counting from the ballot in a parallel process that could be set separately and used as a way of validating the reporting down the line through these segments of reporting from the polling station to the county to the state to the federal.
So you're talking about taking a shaker and putting it on in line. So you're going to be able to take from the scanner, from the reader, from the UI or whatever system is there, and be able to take that, and then at the end of the day, go look at the back of the machine or whatever the official count is and go, is that number the same? Because if it isn't, something's not right.
Exactly.
And you guys couldn't even get a chance to do that then.
No.
Right.
Awesome. And I say awesome in the most sarcastic sense of the word. I mean, that's just a simple test of concept. That's not even intrusive. That's test of concept.
Exactly. Exactly.
So here we are. Realistically speaking, 2020. What can be done now, today, till the next election to at least, I'm not even going to pretend, I'm not going to be naive enough to say fix it, because there's a 0% chance you're going to fix it in that time frame. But what can be done near term to mitigate some of the process fraud that you've seen?
I think the easiest thing right up front is to try to validate the voter rolls and make sure that the polling stations knew who were legitimate voters coming into their polling station.
So, Bill, that's the first step. If you're going to attack this problem, you have to clean those voter rolls before you hit the process side of it.
Exactly.
So it's purely linear.
Yep.
It's step 1, and then step 2 is to secure the process.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
In your best estimation, now I have a number in my mind, and I suspect it's going to be very different from you. and that is, how long do you think that would take? If you were to start, let's say in a vacuum of reality, somebody was to wave their magic wand and bestow upon Bill and Kirk an infinite sum of money and an infinite sum of resources to go out and unscrew this situation, right? How long, operating at 100%, mission-driven, results-driven, how long do you think it would take?
To clean the voter rolls?
Yeah.
Probably about 3 months.
3 months. That is way shorter than I had in my head, and I had a suspicion that it would be. But you're saying,
I mean, that's given you have access to the data, can pull the data down, and then it's a matter of writing the software to make it to validate and verify the data in all the data sets and make sure that you have the equivalences set right and they're correct, and including cleaning up and correcting data. Yeah, about 3 months.
so that's all 50 states, 3 months.
No. If we had broad agreement by all 50 states to do this,
Yep.
the issue would be how to scale manpower who are knowledgeable enough to know what to do. That would be the real challenge once you got the permission of the 50 states. What is probably more realistic is to triage and only go into those states where the balance of power is minuscule. People call them battleground states, the ones that really carry one way or the other.
Purple states.
Everyone deserves a clean shot, but if your schedule doesn't allow you to get to every 50 state, then you can't. I would leave the purely blue states blue and let them fend for themselves. I would leave the purely red states red, but the purple states and the ones that sway the election, that's where I'd focus. And within those, I would focus our efforts on the battleground counties and precincts where the differences get made. And that information's known. There are people who have studied elections all their lives, and they know what the key precincts and counties are. So you start with that list and you go as deep in it as you can. And if you have any time left over to do a purely blue state or a red state, hey, have at it. But that you asked, what can we do by 2020? It's really a matter of how much we can scale that triage up, which I think the actual triaging and decision making is easy. It's scaling the manpower up and the knowledge to know what to do. And that would be the real challenge. So it's hard to know, really, how deep we could go down that list.
But in the near term, it's a matter of trying to find the most problematic of the problematic and then sort of working backwards, as you say, in sort of triage form to sort of have an immediate result. Question for both of you guys again, and that is this solution something that exists at the governmental bureaucratic level, or is this something that could potentially exist in the private sector? Ultimately, a solution to all of this.
Well, I think that.
It could be. It could be a.
Yeah, but I think it properly belongs in government. It's a government problem. It's a government issue, and they need to control it.
So if an Amazon or a Google or a major player steps up and says, we can help, potentially.
Yeah, they'll shadow block them.
Yep. That's one way to look at it. So this solution, in Bill, in your opinion especially, is this is a government problem, requires a government solution.
Exactly.
Okay. And you're saying, I'm still getting my head around the 90 days, but the triage, to actually triage these counties, that data exists, correct? To be able to determine where so you can pull a list of that and say, these are the states, these are the counties. If we have limited resources, this is where we apply them. I don't want to call it minimum effort, but minimum effort, maximum result, right? And then use that as a test of concept for a broader expansion of a potential solution. So that's 2020. So the idea of fixing the entire system for 2020 is that's pie in the sky.
Yeah, right.
It's not going to happen. 2024, 4 years later, right? That to me represents a bit of a window where maybe not, again, the whole system, because this is big, but a major net tangible effect can be had in terms of purification, not only of the data, which is mind-numbingly massive, right? That massive data set that Bill is looking at like it's just a medium-sized spreadsheet. But to purify that data for 2024, right? Take the same approach. Can you get theoretically, or can some ones get 50% of this country done? 4 years.
I wouldn't see
I think
impediment to that. Yeah.
Now, it would depend on us teaming with someone who leads the effort in that area of technology and information management and storage, and how to compare against existing databases. And that comes in the person of Catherine Engelbrecht, who heads up an organization called truethevote.org. She is helping right now Judicial Watch in partnership go into counties, unveil the dirty truths, and then offer to clean them up. So someone like that who already has the subject matter expertise, we would team with, help them expand their capability and ramp up and scale for the larger number of targeted precincts and counties that we would have to go to.
Because in my mind, the sheer, and maybe I'm thinking small on this one, but the manpower that would be required on the engineer side, on the developer side, on the database specialist side, because now here's a bit of a spoiler alert. If you're talking about legacy systems, right? I've read about Cobalt. I've read about Fortran. I mean, I've even messed around with it for my own amusement, but I wouldn't by any capacity call myself an expert in so-called legacy systems. And just to kind of prove and underscore that is with the Covoid situation, you had the New Jersey state unemployment system basically go haywire because it was overwhelmed, and they had an open call for retired programmers. They were desperate for them to come back and help them with their Cobalt system that no one had seen since 1984, right? So I'm thinking in terms of how do you assemble a team that has not only current system knowledge of contemporary databases, SQL, as an example, not my favorite, but certainly, widely used. Oracle is another, but how do you find a team that's got the experience in a 50-year-old database system that may very well be Cobalt, or it may very well be Fortran to a lesser extent, and also have a team together? Where do you draw that talent from?
Well, I know where I get it from old guys like us, and we know enough techies our age who know who those people are, and so it'd be through the network of old guys who worked and built the IBM mainframes and all that stuff, and get them from there.
And so to me that would be the magic of a project like that, is seeing those that maybe I'm being a bit philosophical or esoteric here, but seeing that there's, I call it the nerd generational gap. It really just doesn't exist. It's just systemic differentiation. The mentality is always going to be the same. We all tend to work and play well with each other. But I think that would be super cool to see that. But what I think is also really interesting about this project is digging in and really not knowing what you're going to find. What state has what format? What state used what system? And sort of along the lines, learning the flaws of those systems to patch them and build them into a new system where those won't exist. So the manpower is something I would encourage everybody that's watching this to try to wrap their head around. The knowledge base that's required to do this is not like, it's not like opening Microsoft Word, like you don't just double click and it happens. You're talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lines of code that is going to have to sift and sort through data set sizes that are beyond my comprehension, at the very least. So my point, though, is in terms of an end result, to be able to do this, is this a repeatable process where, let's say you pick a guinea pig state and you do the entire state top to bottom? Like I said, the B-52 comes overhead and they bomb you guys with money and say, let us know when you need another round. And they tell you to go out and get it done. Let's say you take a guinea pig state wherever that may be, a battleground state. You employ this whole system, right? Once that process is outlined, best practices, how quickly then can that move forward once you have a set process? And would that first state be coming up with a set process?
Well, I think for the data side of it, for the voter rolls, so that I mean, we should be able to do the entire country at one time. It's simply copying the data sets. You don't necessarily have to work in their environment. Just copy the data set across of their voter registration and their DMV records and things like that, and then just do a pick and put to create your own format, work in your own format, in your own environment. That simplifies the problem immensely.
So you're not even looking at the legacy systems in that
No,
instance.
you're
just looking at that as an obstacle of just get rid of the whole thing and just give me what's in it.
Just give me the data.
Okay. And now, let's say in a vacuum of reality, that process is then done. We have these nice clean voter rolls. We know that people are supposed to. What do we do to make sure those stay updated? Because unfortunately, in the process, it's going to come down to a human element.
Well, you continually process and reprocess any of the updates to any of the data sets you're using.
So this is about a state being disciplined enough to maintain ultimately what you would then build.
Well,
a team would build.
A good deal of it would be dependent on them to update their database. If they update their database, then we can pull those updates off and use all the software we have developed in our own environment to update the central data set.
So they wouldn't actually have to change the systems that they're using because you'd be just siphoning the data out absent the structure into your own. So the integrity of a new, let's call it V2.0 voter roll, would be wholly dependent on states and their databases playing nicely.
Well, plus some federal databases like Census Bureau and also Social Security and things like that would help us resolve who is an eligible voter.
Okay.
But correct the hardware and all that in these different states, that's the real bear.
And I would take this a step further, Nick, to help the states, and that is I would move from a batch processing of all recent arrivals in a given geographical location, a state, a precinct, a county, whatever. I would move from that to a automatically updated when someone moves in and registers as a resident, changes their tax address through IRS records, any number of ways to detect newness as well as people leaving. And I would build enough automation that those checks are made and the rolls automatically updated. Why ask a person to finger punch that data in? It's prone to error. People don't want to do it. They're not staffed to do it. And that's why we're so far behind in states as far as cleanly updated records that are mostly error-free. So I would clean that up.
So this is effectively, in addition to actually the data, it is in effect then scripting what I would consider to be the mother of all macros to pull from all these different sources, correlate all this data together, and assign to that single record one of two possible states or three possible states: valid, invalid, or needs more info. That would be the end goal of this, right? Yeah. Totally automated, where you'd have needs more info. Okay, maybe that requires a human review, right? Or, this person's good to go. They meet the criteria. It passed through the script. It didn't trigger anything out of the ordinary. They're fine. They're good to go. Or, no way, something's not right there. That's an outright no. We'll review that at a later time and date. Or that record is out because that person is deceased, or that record is out because they may have changed their name through marriage, or whatever criteria may exist. Yeah. So the process of managing the data after you clean it is as if not more important than the actual cleaning process to begin with. Otherwise, I'm going to use the laundry analysis. Nobody likes to do laundry, right? The longer you wait, the more it piles up. The longer you got to stand at the washing machine waiting for it to clean. So if you stay on top of it, right, the task isn't so Herculean anymore. It becomes a more manageable sized task. That's so, right. And then to look at this from the other side, and that is once you do have this, right, where it's all automated and working as intended, to use a real developer term, you then have the process of actually using that data to ensure that people that are supposed to be voting are voting, and people who aren't supposed to be voting aren't voting. And we're going to go through this in a second, but the actual process of them walking into a voting booth, entering their vote, and processing it, there's no tampering from the point where they say they are who they are to the point where their vote gets tallied. And again, my expertise would be more on the systemic side of these processes. So again, money, no object, infinite loads of capital shoved at you to undertake this project. In your mind's eye, both of you guys, describe to me your perfect system. How does it work? From when I walk into, say, a high school gymnasium to cast my vote, what does that system look like?
Well, I think one of the main things Kirk and I have always tried to do is get a real-time interactive system, so that once you came into a polling station and signed in as a voter, and within, say, a second or two, it should say you are a valid voter or you're not, and here's the questions we have about you, or questions about the data that describes you. So all of that should be able to, and doable, before the vote is even cast.
So that's gate number one, if you want to use it as a process. So process gate number one is I show up, I whip out my driver's license, and I say, I'm me. And I hand them they run my DMV number, whatever, and they say, yes, you are. You're eligible to vote right here. Okay, great. So now I've passed gate one. I've passed that first quality control checkpoint, if you will, right? So now on I go into an actual voting booth. Okay, this is something I wanted to ask both of you guys, because it's an idea that I've had, and it's apparently the same idea that you guys have had. Is the machine that I'm casting my vote on should have no access to the outside world. We all agree on that, right?
Yep. Yep.
Absolutely.
I should be on a contained network with no 192.168.0.1 out to the outside world, other than the in-building network. Period. The end. Now, for purposes of the folks watching that, what are my advantages of having an off-network system?
Well, you get to control the process that way without the potential of outside interference that could come from any direction,
Which means if somebody, with, say, my skill set or a similar skill set, let's say we're sitting out in the parking lot and we have a laptop, there's no router for me to get in through. There's no Wi-Fi for me to ward drive or WAP crack on, right? I can't touch that unless I'm physically in the building holding a piece of Cat5 cable to one of those machines, at which point in time somebody's going to notice.
Yeah.
So they presumably, let's not assume anything. They should notice. Yeah. Somebody standing there suspiciously with a laptop plugged into one of their voting systems, trying to act casual. But that's step one, is this off-network system, which means the notion of an outside entity, anyone outside of that building, interfering with the process that's going on that air-gapped, which is a term you used earlier, that air-gapped network drops to zero, because there is no network that exists to the outside world. Correct?
Right.
Does any state have that now?
Not that I know of.
Not that we know of, right.
No one's attempted that.
There might be people at university labs or somewhere, and I'm thinking of Rice University, who's been working on a secure voting process for 10 years. And how that looks at that level of detail, I'm not sure. I've gone out recently on the web to try to get an update, but I can't find anything more recent than 2018. So I would like to call up Rice and talk to that department and get their most up-to-date documents of where they are. My understanding is they've done really good work on building a voting system that is accessible, which is a must. It has to be accessible to people who have disabilities, blind people, all people of all shapes and colors. and it has to be secure. And so I just like to go get updated on where they are first and see if there are some lessons learned we could pull along the way at a detailed level.
So in an air-gapped system where, again, there's none of this outside access, right, and it's totally contained, of course there's going to always be, I call it the seesaw, usability versus security, right? Yep. And this is going to be a public-facing, because presumably when you tra-la-la to the voting booth, you're going to be staring at either a touch screen or a keypad or some interactive point, some end-user point, where you're going to have to make sure that is, as you say, accessible not just to people that may not be familiar with technology, but people with disabilities. So that's all going to have to be engineered and designed. And in the grander scheme of things, I would think that's the easy part, right? Mm-hmm. So after all is said and done in our hypothetical system that we're talking about here, it's completely air-gapped, so we know no one from the outside's gotten in. I have to report the vote tallies. Okay? So now I have to transmit that data, be that from a USB, an MMC. It's certainly not going to be direct from the machines, right? I have to transmit that data from point A to point B to, I would assume, the state level, right, for a final count.
For the state, okay. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this one, for purposes of everybody watching this. The minute I connect to the outside world with that data, I'm a target.
Yeah, except that you would want to use some encryption in that reporting. Once Correct. You start doing that and use a unique encryption, for example, not publicly known, then it becomes much more difficult for anybody to interfere.
Because if I walk in there and I say, I'm going to transmit this in Microsoft Excel spreadsheet format, right? I'm using an extreme example here, but the minute I push send, or the minute that hits the cloud, or that hits public fiber, or that hits public copper, I'm fair game for anybody between point A and point B with their butterfly net out, i.e. a packet sniffer.
Yep.
To not just intercept them to see the results in advance, assuming I'm fast enough to reassemble and resequence those packets. Right. But I can start to alter those packets and alter those results. And if you don't think it can happen, I play a ton of video games. There are people that cheat at online games by spoofing packets and by mangling packets and by modding packets to send a signal that may not be the intended signal to the receiving unit. In this instance, it wouldn't be a video game server. It would be a final vote tally machine. So if I decide that candidate A gets 100 more votes, I have to figure out, sequence those packets, know what 100 vote increments looks like. I spoof or copy, throw another one of those packets in line, and no one's the wiser, assuming it's not encrypted.
Yeah.
Pretty fair analysis?
Yes.
Yeah. The only other thing that might want to consider doing is to tempest the entire closed network, air-gapped network, because you could, in fact, pick up the reading of these votes at some distance that will vary according to the emissions from the devices themselves. But you could, in fact, pick up those votes in that way. But if you tempest it, then nothing will leak from them and no one could pick that up.
I.e., so you're talking about actually hardening the way we would see on a military installation or a naval ship at sea. You would want some actual physical protection there, without getting into too much detail. You would want some physical protection there that guards against off-network style, presumably exploitable air-gap hacks, if you will. Right. Now, in terms of, just so we can all wrap our heads around it, in terms of skill, where would you put, like, some of the stuff that you're talking about? The reason that you would want to do these tempesting measures, these additional hardening measures, where's the skill level of somebody that's going to be able to exploit those? Is that something that anybody can do, or is that you're playing with the big boys at that level?
Well, I mean, but I mean, you could do things like have CIA could set a separate set of people out to do this. That's possible to do
with portable enough equipment.
Yeah, or FBI could do it. Yeah,
with portable enough and with accessible enough equipment.
Yeah, that's right.
effectively.
Yeah.
Well, that's comforting. So this entire process, the end result in my mind. Now, again, I use my and I beg everybody forgive my ADD style here. But that's why I got 29 monitors around me, so I can forget what I'm doing 29 times. But it's multitasking. It's the art of screwing more than one thing up at once.
Yeah.
So I have this process now. Now, the last portion of this, as we were speaking about earlier, which is getting the data from A to B. Bill, you said encryption.
Yep.
Why wouldn't I say just grab something off the shelf? RSA 256.
Well, because it's a well-known system that I'm quite sure has got lots of backdoors and lots of weaknesses in it. Mainly, I view key exchange as a weakness. Period. Okay, so anything doing that is weak.
I'm laughing, Bill, because I do agree with you, and that may or may not be as the result of some creative testing throughout my when I was younger.
Yeah.
But if we may, Kirk, and if you don't want me to, I will certainly edit this portion out. But can we use your recent what you've asked of me to do with your Word doc as an example of how easy 256 encryption is to break?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I don't think most of the average person realizes that these really aren't true protections, or if they are, they're momentary. They can guard your data for in seconds. It would be under 60 seconds. So you need something more sophisticated, which is doable. This isn't technologically hard. You just have to implement it on scale.
Correct. And that's where, Bill, you said it's perhaps a bit more of an exotic flavor of encryption as opposed to something that's off the shelf because, well, let's face it, the example I was asking Kirk about is Kirk had recently sent me one of his own Word documents that he'd forgotten the password to, right, which contained generic 256 encryption, RSA 256, and within, what was that, Kirk, about a day, I was able to get through it?
That's right.
About a day. And that's... Yep. We won't say the company, all right? It was a word processing doc, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, right? And that's commercially available RSA, and with, I wouldn't call it an excessive level of skill or anything too exotic in terms of software. We're not going to tell people how to do it because we don't want anybody going out running amok, but was able to decrypt what was supposed to, be bulletproof for purposes of discussion. I was able to get through that, which means... As a point, and that was a kind of a loaded question, Bill, but as a point, you're saying now, let's say somebody was to put out something a little bit more, let's call it sinister than 256 or 128 or 512, right? Where are my advantages there?
Well, as long as you don't share the algorithm or the process with anybody else, you have your closed network, you have a closed network. I mean, that means in order to get in, somebody's either going to have to physically invade your spaces, take the data off your computer, or actually hack into your computer and remove the algorithms. If they can't do that, and you're in an air-gapped in a tempested environment, then they are in the hot seat to try to solve the encryption. And if you do, if you add the sinister factors, it can in fact make it extremely difficult for them to do that.
So I'm transferring my vote tally from my little precinct polling station using, let's say, some sinister flavor of encryption that no one's ever seen before.
Yep. From
point A to point B. I am then able to use, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but public fiber. I'm able to transmit that on existing networks. Yep. I don't need to lay my own cable. I don't need to have my own separate fiber. I don't need my own separate copper. I can do this. So what that does is reduce the cost.
Yep.
You're not talking about running entirely new infrastructure. You're using the existing infrastructure that we're doing this interview on. I can send my encrypted vote tallies from I happen to live in the state of Pennsylvania, all over Pennsylvania. I can send those to Harrisburg. And I know that when they get there, they are not tampered with. They are not messed with. They are not spoofed. They are not hacked.
Yep.
Because of the encryption on it.
That's right.
So, again, circle back. We'll go back to the original process of verifying the voter, cleaning up those voter rolls, and then having this process there. how confident would you guys both be in saying that would the end result of that, again, vacuum of reality, unlimited money, and this system is implemented nationwide? What are the chances the end result of that is an actual, legitimately fair election?
I would put it in the high 90s of percentile.
I would too, perhaps 98%, 99%.
98 to 99%, as opposed to what we have now, which we can't even quantify because we can't even get a good look at the systems that are erroneous.
Yep.
That's right. Yep.
This is a solution.
Keep in mind though, Nick, we wanted to have a parallel counting process that would we could do a comparison at the end to see if our parallel process also produced the same numbers. And if they didn't, then we'd have to backtrack and kind of reprocess everything, or reprocess at some different points along the line where we'd see a deviation and a change.
So this,
but that's not the long-term solution. That's a patch for 2020, a parallel count check. Right.
So, again, looking at this from maybe a bit more of a private sector perspective, a retail software or systems perspective, this is a box solution that any governor, any representative can look at, assuming it existed, and say, I want that in my state because I want free and fair elections. And they would be able to push the button, make the phone call, do whatever they have to do, and this system can be installed without the addition of any additional infrastructure. We're not talking tens of millions or even millions of dollars. Hypothetically, we're talking about really the cost of endpoint user systems. That's it, which is in the thousands, not the millions.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So now it's down to, and this is what I'm really curious. This is down to now people that actually want to solve the problem, because the excuse of we don't have the technology just went out the window in the last 57 minutes of this interview. We can't is now gone. So now it's down to, do we want to?
That's right.
That's right.
Okay. So the way I see it is that if a system like this existed in and of itself, it would put pressure on the folks that really need to step up and make a decision and say, yeah, we're going to fix this problem, right? Because if the average citizen knows that this system exists, a very rational, logical question is going to be, why aren't we using it?
Yeah.
That's right.
Right. So to me, the development of a prototype is going to make some people very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Knowing that such a technology is out there, and cost isn't an issue, implementation isn't an issue. It's just a matter of deciding that you want to fix the problem, because it's one of the things Dave and I have in common, and I suspect you guys do as well, is that it's one thing to complain about a problem. That's fine. Identifying problems is great.
Yep.
But to complain about it and to continue to do the same thing over and over and over again, that is a one-way trip to high blood pressure city.
Right. Absolutely right.
Yeah. Also, it's generally when you consider doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome is generally a sign of a little bit of instability there.
It's true fact. Einstein said it, man. It's a true fact. But I see this as and I know this is a discussion for another time, and hopefully this is not the last time we do this, because if I'm perfectly honest, I'm enjoying myself here. I hope you guys are too.
Yeah, sure.
But this to me is an example of ethical, good use of data.
Yeah. Correct.
This is what these systems exist.
Yep. That's right.
Absolutely.
This is a good use. This is, and I know you guys have been very outspoken about this, about questionable uses of data and questionable data collection practices.
Yep.
Right. But this is an example of the power of data to benefit. And I personally think as the ordinary citizen, I think it's absolutely brilliant, number one, and I would hope others do as well. But to that point, there's other applications, and I just wanted to give one person a mention on this before I forget. Again, ADD style, I have my notes all over the place. And that is, in terms of good use of data, we're in a situation now with COVID, where there's another opportunity to provide this good use of data to sort of reopen this country and do it in a fair and equitable manner. It's been talked about before, but the reason I bring it up, I am not a medical expert. That would be Dr. Dave. on the other hand, as a data guy, would want to direct people to an article that was written by former Michigan State Senator Pat Colbeck about how data, again, just like with what you guys are talking about with voting, another example of the way good data usage can be applied to subvert problems. I mean, real problems, and do it in an equitable, and do it in a fair, and do it in a rational manner, absent a lot of the, I guess, the emotional-irrational political fodder that's around it. So if for those watching this, if you'd like to, do please check it out. It's on Dr. Dave's page. It's by the time this goes up, it should still be on the homepage. If not, check the contributing editor section. It's a brilliant article. And I've gotten to know Pat pretty well, and he's another data-driven guy and someone who I think is about as passionate about fixing this electorate system as you guys are. But on that note, gentlemen, I want to thank both of you sincerely. I've been wanting to do this for a while, by the way, but I want to thank you both sincerely for joining me today and hanging out with me here in my little corner of Dave's universe, the DAR. And is there anything else I suppose I should ask at this point that you guys would like to add before we call this one a day?
I think we pretty well covered it, Nick.
Yeah, I think we did as well, Nick, and I want to thank you for hosting us and making this possible, and thanks to Dr. Dave for letting it happen.
Yep.
Great opportunity.
I had a great time. Thank you guys again for coming on, and like I said, hopefully we get a chance to do this again. But on that note, I want to thank everybody for taking the opportunity to watch this. Hopefully you learned a little something. Hopefully we didn't get too geeky on you, because that was Kirk's job. He was the adult supervision of this operation. But the point of the story, though, is these are problems that can be solved. It's about getting the right people with the right skill set in the right place and getting out of their way. I call it the Chris Kraft effect, to reference NASA of the 1950s and the 1960s. Yep. You know, you have people with the talent, guys like you have people with the ability, the know-how, and the desire to do it. Just give them the resources and get the hell out of the way. And this is, I think, a very solvable problem, and one that I think we'll explore again in the future as we start to get our heads wrapped around this. But again, on that note, I want to thank everybody for watching. Thanks for being a premium access subscriber if you're watching this. So again, thanks to everyone, and we'll catch you on the next one.
All right.